Memphis, Tennessee. It was 2024. Nancy Clarke sits in her modest apartment on the south side of Memphis, her weathered hands folding and unfolding a faded photograph of herself, standing outside Graceland's front door. She's 78 years old now, and for 47 years, she's carried secrets that weigh heavier than all the laundry she ever carried up those famous stairs. People think they know Elvis Presley, Nancy says, her voice still carrying traces of the Mississippi Delta accent that caught Elvis's attention all those years ago. They know the performer, the movie star, the legend, but I knew Mr. Elvis. I knew the man. Nancy Clarke worked as a maid at Graceland from 1965 to 1977, 12 years, that spanned Elvis's marriage to Priscilla, his comeback, his Vegas years, and his tragic end. She was hired when she was just 31 years old, a single mother who needed work and found herself caring for the most famous man in the world. This is creative storytelling, inspired by the many documented accounts from Graceland staff members who witnessed Elvis's private life and the intimate moments that shaped his final years. The first thing you need to understand, Nancy begins, is that Graceland wasn't just Elvis's home. It was his sanctuary, his prison, and his stage, all rolled into one. And the people who worked there, we weren't just employees. We became his family, because his real family was complicated, and fame had made real relationships almost impossible. Nancy was hired by Elvis's father, Vernon, but it was Elvis himself who set the rules for how she should work. The most important rule: everything she saw and heard at Graceland stayed at Graceland. Mr. Elvis looked me in the eye on my first day and said, "Nancy, I'm going to trust you with my privacy. That's the most valuable thing I have to give." And for 47 years, I kept that trust. But now I think he would want people to understand who he really was. Nancy's daily routine at Graceland began at 6 a.m. and often didn't end until late at night. She cleaned Elvis's bedroom suite, his bathroom, his walk-in closet filled with hundreds of costumes and casual clothes. She washed his sheets, organized his medications, and tidied the personal items that revealed the man behind the myth. The first thing that surprised me was how many books Mr. Elvis had. People think he was just a pretty face who could sing, but his bedroom was full of books about spirituality, philosophy, religion. He was always trying to understand why God had given him such a gift and such a burden. Nancy's voice breaks slightly as she describes finding Elvis's personal journals scattered around his room, filled with questions about his purpose, his responsibility to his fans, and his fear that he was disappointing everyone who believed in him. He used to write letters to his mama, even though she'd been dead for years. Long letters, apologizing for not being the son she raised him to be. I found those letters in his nightstand, and reading them by accident, it broke my heart. But Nancy also witnessed Elvis's extraordinary kindness to the people who worked for him. When Nancy's own mother was diagnosed with cancer in 1970, Elvis paid for her treatment without being asked. When Nancy's son needed money for college, Elvis quietly arranged for a scholarship that the family only later learned came from him personally. Mr. Elvis never wanted credit for the good things he did. He said helping people was between him and God, and nobody else needed to know about it. But I knew. I saw the checks he wrote, the phone calls he made, the lives he changed just because he could. The most difficult part of Nancy's job was managing Elvis's prescription medications. By the early 1970s, Elvis was taking pills for pain, for sleep, for energy, for anxiety. Nancy was instructed to keep different medications in different rooms, so Elvis always had access to what he thought he needed. "It wasn't my place to question what the doctors prescribed," Nancy says, her voice heavy with regret. But I watched those pills change, Mr. Elvis, from a vibrant, energetic man into someone who was struggling just to get through each day. I wanted to say something, but who was I to interfere with medical treatment? Nancy describes finding Elvis unconscious in his bathroom on multiple occasions throughout 1,975 and 1,976 years before his final, fatal collapse. Each time, she would help revive him, clean him up, and help him back to bed, never speaking about these incidents to anyone. He would look at me with such shame and embarrassment. He'd say, "Nancy, I'm sorry you had to see me like this." And I would tell him, "Mr. Elvis, you don't owe me any apologies. I'm here to take care of you, whatever that means. L." The relationship between Elvis and Priscilla was more complicated than the public ever knew, according to Nancy. She witnessed the gradual dissolution of their marriage through small, heartbreaking moments. Miss Priscilla was a lovely woman, but she was young when she married Mr. Elvis, and she grew up to be someone different than he expected, and he grew up to be someone different than she expected. They loved each other, but they stopped being able to live together. Nancy cleaned up after their arguments, found Priscilla's tears on her pillowcases, and watched Elvis sit alone in his room after fights, staring at wedding pictures and trying to understand where things had gone wrong. After Miss Priscilla left, Mr. Elvis was lost. He didn't know how to be alone, but he also didn't know how to be with people anymore. Fame had made him suspicious of everyone's motives except the people who worked for him, because we were the only ones who saw him at his worst and didn't ask for anything except to do our jobs. The period after Elvis's divorce was when Nancy saw him at his most vulnerable. He would have conversations with her while she cleaned his room, treating her like a therapist or a mother figure. He told me once that he felt like he was disappearing, that Elvis Presley was becoming bigger and bigger, but Elvis, Aaron Presley, the real person, was getting smaller and smaller, until someday there wouldn't be anything left but the image. Nancy also witnessed Elvis's struggles with his weight and appearance during his final years. She helped him into stage costumes that had to be constantly altered, watched him stare at himself in mirrors with disgust, and listened to him berate himself for not having the self-control to maintain the image his fans expected. People made jokes about Mr. Elvis getting heavy, but they didn't understand that every pound he gained was proof to him that he was failing. He was so hard on himself about everything. The most shocking revelation Nancy shares concerns the night of August 15th, 1977, just hours before Elvis's death. She was working late, organizing his closet, when Elvis asked her to sit with him while he talked. He was scared that night, more scared than I'd ever seen him. He told me he'd been having dreams about his mama calling to him, and he was afraid of what that meant. He asked me if I thought God could forgive someone who had wasted the gifts they'd been given. Nancy told Elvis that she believed God was more forgiving than people gave him credit for, and that Elvis had brought joy to millions of people around the world. But Elvis seemed unconvinced. He said, "Nancy, I've been Elvis Presley for so long, I don't remember how to be just Elvis, and I'm tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm not." That was the last real conversation we ever had. The next evening, Nancy found Elvis collapsed in his bathroom. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Nancy was one of the people who helped prepare Graceland for the chaos that followed: the media, the fans, the investigation, the funeral planning. After Mr. Elvis died, Vernon asked all of us staff members to keep our memories private. He said Mr. Elvis deserved to be remembered for his music and his performances, not for his struggles. And for 47 years, I honored that request. Nancy kept working at Graceland for several months after Elvis's death, helping to organize his belongings and prepare the mansion for its eventual conversion into a museum. But she found the experience too painful and eventually left to work for other families in Memphis. Walking through those rooms after he was gone, cleaning spaces he would never occupy again. It was heartbreaking. But it also helped me understand that Mr. Elvis was finally at peace. The man who had been carrying the weight of being Elvis Presley his whole adult life was finally free from that burden. For decades, Nancy has watched documentaries, read books, and listened to interviews about Elvis, most of which focus on his fame, his music, or his problems. Very few capture the person she knew, a man who was both extraordinarily gifted and profoundly lonely. Mr. Elvis was the most generous person I ever knew, and also the most isolated. He could fill a stadium with 50,000 people who loved him, but he couldn't fill the emptiness inside himself. That's the real tragedy of his story. Nancy's decision to finally speak about her experiences comes from her belief that Elvis's humanity should be remembered alongside his legend. I'm 78 years old, and most of the people who knew Mr. Elvis personally are gone now. If those of us who are left don't tell the truth about who he was, not just the performer, but the person, then future generations will only know the myth. And Mr. Elvis was so much more than any myth could contain. Nancy shows me the photograph she's been holding throughout our conversation. It was taken on her last day of work at Graceland in 1978. She's standing by the front door, looking back at the mansion one final time. I loved that man, like he was my own son, she says. Not Elvis Presley, the star, but Elvis the person who said please and thank you, who remembered my birthday, who worried about everyone except himself. That's the Elvis I want people to remember. Nancy's final words about Elvis are both heartbreaking and hopeful. Mr. Elvis spent his whole life trying to be worthy of the love people gave him. What he never understood was that he was already worthy just for being who he was. I hope wherever he is now, he finally knows that. This story is creative exploration based on documented accounts from Graceland staff members and the many testimonials about Elvis's private life from people who worked closely with him. While Nancy Clarke is a fictional character, her experiences represent the collective memories of the housekeepers, cooks, and other employees who witnessed Elvis's humanity during his most vulnerable moments. The prescription drug struggle, the loneliness, the generosity, and the internal conflicts Nancy describes are all consistent with documented reports from people who knew Elvis personally. The specific incidents may be dramatized, but they reflect the very real challenges Elvis faced in his private life. What makes Nancy's fictional account valuable is that it represents the perspective of working-class people who cared for Elvis not because of his fame, but because he treated them with respect and kindness. These relationships often provided Elvis with his most genuine human connections during the isolation of his final years. The real message of Nancy's story is about the importance of seeing celebrities as complete human beings rather than just public figures. Elvis Presley's struggles with identity, purpose, and self-worth are universal human experiences, made more complex by the unique pressures of extraordinary fame. If Nancy's story has given you a different perspective on Elvis Presley or made you think about the human cost of fame, I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because next week we're sharing another untold story from someone who knew Elvis when the cameras weren't rolling. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think the people who worked for celebrities have a right to share their memories, or should some things stay private forever? Share this video with someone who understands that behind every famous person is a human being with the same needs, fears, and hopes as everyone else. Because here's the truth, Nancy's story teaches us. Fame may change how the world sees you, but it doesn't change your need for genuine human connection, understanding, and love. The music is bigger than any of us, but the person who creates the music needs the same things we all need: respect, compassion, and the freedom to be imperfect. Thank you for listening to Nancy's story with the respect and empathy that Mr. Elvis would have appreciated. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue exploring the human side of legendary figures. Remember, everyone deserves to be remembered for their whole story, not just their public moments. Thanks for watching.